Hi there, and welcome back to Asian Art. In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about Hindu art, primarily the sculptures and the temples that give rise to the Hindu traditions that we see today. To begin with, I want to talk about what the purpose of the art or the idols is all about. The art plays a very important religious function, and it is seen in a very conservative way in that it is sort of adverse to change. It's not that change didn't happen, but change happens very slowly over a very long period of time. The reason for this lack of change is that people believe that the deity represents, the sculpture represents the deity, and that it is in a way an embodiment of the deity. It is not the entire deity, it is what we call an aspect of the deity. The deity is multivalent, can be in many places at one time, and has the ability to have the sort of power to reach out in many directions all at once. And yet there is a sense that when the worshiper is in front of a statue or a work of art, that the presence of the deity should come through the work, then it should allow the deity and the worshiper to have a kind of communion, a sort of moment in grace together. It becomes also an image to meditate on, a kind of a place to fix one's attention, whereas meditation can be very open and general. This provides a sort of anchor to people who are worshiping. It is also a place where someone can bring an offering. The idea of an offering is a very important concept in Hinduism. These offerings tend to be flowers or incense or water, special waters, or ghee, clarified butter. These different kinds of gifts that people make to the deity are, in a sense, a kind of sacrifice, allowing the deity to feed on the wealth and prosperity that the deity has provided to the worshiper. When we look at a work of art, here is a very ancient statue that is of a Yakshi. Now, a Yakshi is not a high deity. It is more like a servant or a figure that is there to support the deity in their divine abode. Something that may be sort of equivalent to the idea of an angel. There's someone who is a symbol of fertility. The Yakshi is there to be a sense that the deity is present. Now, this particular statue is one that is quite old, is about 200 AD or CE, and yet it bears the very sort of classic Hindu elements of this sort of voluptuous, idealized body. Notice holding in his hand is a thing called the chowri, hence its name, the chowri bearer. This chowri is like a fly whisk. It's there to sort of fan and brush away any disturbances from the deity. So it's there in a symbolic way as a way to kind of give comfort to and lend support to another deity who is not visible. We see in this the sort of classic clothing, the adorned body, and a very important aspect of these statues is that the body is not entirely static. We see one foot is slightly ahead of the other, as if it is moving toward us. And so this is a very important aspect of Hindu statues, this idea of movement and gesture. And so we call this the gait of the swan, or Mara Lagimini. And this is the sense of moving toward with a kind of grace and presence. Another important aspect of the statue is its idealized nature. It doesn't represent a specific human being or general human qualities. Though the features and proportions are clearly human, you'll notice that the shapes that make up the body are stylized. They are abstracted. The arm, we don't see clearly where the muscles are, or the bones, or the tendons, as a real body would have. And the breasts and the hips and the waist all have these sort of idealized shapes and forms. In fact, if we look at this later statue here, it's in this very extraordinary dance pose that a real human being probably couldn't make. Because it requires a kind of twisting of the spine that people don't do. That doesn't mean that it's wrong. It means that it's striving for a kind of idealized beauty to represent a gesture that is in part divine. A sense that this is the body that is suffused with the spirit. And so arms are not meant to be like human arms. They're meant to be perfect arms with a kind of tapering of a lotus root. You can see the example over here on the lower left. And we refer to this sort of idealized perfect bodies and their gestures as angika. And this is the sort of the center expressive quality of the statue. And if you look at the face, you'll notice it doesn't have a whole lot of expression. It has a kind of stillness and fixity that doesn't give you a sense of breath, animated life. But the body itself, in its twisted and exciting, contorted ways, is part of that sense of the energy of the divine. Dance is a very important part of Hindu art and a part of Hindu ritual. And in those rituals, the dance is meant to communicate in many ways ideals and values and spiritual ideas. And many ways in which the body does this is through the hands in these very stylized gestures called Mudra. This is a statue of Krishna as a young boy, and he is dancing. And you can see the sort of lively animated pose that has his upper body sort of turning and twisting, and the hand facing us with its palm out. This is a very important mudra you will see over and over again. It is when a deity is signaling to you to fear not. This mudra is a way the deity is expressing the idea that they have come and are in your presence as a benefactor, someone who is there to help. They are not there to harm or to give trouble. Many of the deities we see are stylized in a fertile way and represent fertility as a very important source of spiritual power. But the opposite can also be true. Here we see Chamunda in this sort of devastated, death-like state with this hollowed-out womb. She is death incarnate in a sense of Durga, the destroyer, with multiple arms there to sense the kind of death and decay, the other side of life and vitality. You'll notice that there is a scorpion right in the center of the belly, something poisoned and dried up and unable to give life. Now, these amazing works of art that we see are not signed. We have no record of who made them. We know the kind of people who made them. The people who would be assigned to the job of carving these would be our skilled laborers, and they would belong to a caste who would be assigned to this job, and they would do it as a part of their caste obligation. This caste is the Vaishya caste for the most part, and they would be working in this way to perform their duty to this. They would be paid, and they may even be recognized for their exceptional skill. But they do it in part because of their sense of obligation, their dharma, to the divine law, that this is the job that they must fulfill. Hence, they do not feel the need to sign or have their name inscribed on the work that they make. Another very interesting quality that we will see when we start to look at other religions within India is that they share many characteristics, almost identical in a lot of different ways, that they are idealized in their shape and form. We're going to look here now at two works of art, one by a Hindu artist and one by a Buddhist. Now, the similarities here are quite striking. You can see the same idealized sorts of bodies and gestures and actions between these two figures. Now, the similarities, they both represent this idea of fertility, a very important idea to both Hindus and Buddhists. So the similarity is partially borne by the fact that artists of a certain caste might be called on to be carvers in both Hindu and Buddhist shrines and temples. And so they would apply the same skills and ideas that they had in one on the other. Another is that Buddhists and Hindus want to be open and appeal to people who are not of their faith. And so they might put these symbols there to reassure them that their faith is recognized and their ideas about fertility and virtue would be something that would be carried on in this religion as well as the other religions. One of the things you probably start to notice is these idealized bodies might appear very sexual. The breasts, the hips, the broad shoulders. There's a kind of voluptuousness, a sensuality that is very evident in Hindu art. And this is in part, as I mentioned earlier, due to this idea of fertility being an important virtue. And it's also a sense that the divine is communicating itself through the body, that the body and the spirit are experiencing a kind of yoga. Remember that the idea of union that comes from the spirit and the divine is a sort of idealized, an ideal virtue. Okay, so here what we call the Methuna, this loving couple, is again this idea of the physical and spiritual union of opposites, male and female. You'll notice that the center of their body, there's a kind of rounded stomach with a very deep navel. And this is a very interesting characteristic you'll see on many statues that are Hindu and Buddhist. This is called prana, which means breath. And if you've ever practiced yoga or have done yogic meditation, people may have mentioned this idea of breathing in accordance to certain practices of sort of in through the nose and out through the mouth, this way of kind of cleansing the body through breath. This deep round belly is right where the diaphragm sits, and this was a way in which sculptors were trying to communicate this idea of an idealized body, one that was and had union with its spirit through its breath. To be clear, there are many explicit and very sensual and even sexual poses that have been carved on Hindu temples. This is a part of the kind of spiritual history of old Hindu beliefs and ideas. We will not go into great depth about the meaning and reason for this, but I just want to point out that the important ideas that these spiritual bodies represent is this kind of union, not just between the the physical and the spiritual, but also between the male and the female. The female has a very distinct kind of spiritual energy called Shakti, which is embodied in this union between men and women. Now, the temple itself is usually made of two parts, which also represents this kind of union of male and female. And those particular sculptures, relief carvings we were looking at, are found right at the juncture between this male and female portions of the temple. Now, this particular style of temple is in we call the northern style, the Nagara. And this is particularly the Jagadamba temple at Khajuraho, which dates to the 11th century CE or AD. Now, the Nagara style has this wonderful, tall, elegant quality. It feels sort of like flowing water pouring down its sides like a great fountain. And you can see this exquisite, rich detail in the carvings that have this amazing richness and vitality to them. If we do a cutaway version, we can kind of see through a plan view that the temple has many interesting parts to it. There's sort of an opening area in the front of the temple, which is where you would walk up the steps. Then you enter into a central courtyard, and here offerings would be presented to a deity that resides in this innermost chamber, this part of the temple under the main tower, which is the sort of cavity which holds the statue that represents the deity of the temple. This area we call the Garbhagriha, or womb house. It is really like a body itself in that it is what's sort of giving birth to the deity within the temple. Here is where worshippers will come to bring their puja, as you see this young girl doing before the statues of this one shrine that she is visiting. The offerings you see are flowers and garlands and sometimes cloth and incense and holy water or ghee, clarified butter. And this is how most people who worship at Hindu temples see these deities, not clean and but ornamented and dressed and festooned with garlands and offerings, because this is the kind of bounty that they want to share and show their devotion to the deity. So the Nagara style, we saw the Jagadamba temple at Khajuraho in the north. There is a southern style called the Dravida style, and we'll be looking at the Malappuram temple on the coast of India. Here is the Mamallapuram temple in the Dravida style. Now this is a very unique temple in that it is carved from a single giant boulder that was along the coast. It's one of the oldest temples we have in this style, and what's so remarkable about this carving is the way it sort of reveals a sort of wooden architecture. If you look at the way it's cut and designed and tooled, and it's not really a kind of stone architecture, but it has this very specific kind of jointry that we can kind of make out from the way it's carved and arranged. So this stone carving is actually a copy of what must have been an earlier design for a wooden temple. Here are some later temples from the 9th century. The Bhoga Nandishvara temple from the 9th century, dedicated to Shiva. And here you can see the sort of square sides and base, not the sort of rounded, fluted quality that we came to see in the north, but this seems, again, much more like a kind of wooden boxy structure that has always got the sort of pyramidal sides that point up to the top that are distinctive of the Dravida style. Side by side, you can see the differences between the Nagara fountain-like style in the north and the southern mountain-like style of the Dravida. These are my way of kind of trying to remember the differences between Nagara and Dravida. Temples are designed and planned with great care, and very complex mathematical formulas are used. It is the Brahman's responsibility to design and lay out the plan for the temple. It is then the Kshatriya, the kings who are there to fund and pay for the temple. And then it is the Vaishya and the Sudra who will build the temple. And is this sort of division of the different temples that come into their making. You see this layout of these spiritual designs that the Brahmins use. This one over here is this yantra text in which the magical formulas and prayers for each part of this kind of cosmic body will be used to address a different deity or different aspect of the temple's design. Here is a much later Hindu statue of a Yakshi, the same sort of deity we began this lecture with. In this case, this much later, more modern version can see this exquisite movement and grace that is incredible detail that had been given to this stone carving. Now the dance gesture is very explicit. There's a kind of beautiful uplift to the upper part of the body, even as the foot is moving forward with this very delicate and precise movement, just like a dancer would. You'll also notice that in the foreground, there are musicians of very diminutive size. This scale difference, this unnatural scale difference, is a way of demonstrating the differences between this idea of a powerful central deity or Yakshi and a kind of lesser supporter deities to sort of give a greater presence to the larger deity. Let us now review what we've learned in this lecture. Again, if you're having any trouble answering these questions, it would be best if you go back and review the lecture again. Question 1. What purpose do the Hindu sculptures and temples serve? Question 2. Who made the sculptures? Question 3. Why are the sculptures idealized? Question 4. How come Hindu and Buddhist sculptures look alike? And question 5. What are the differences between Nagara and Dravida style temples?